Ever wondered how within the space of 60 years we went from this to this? Today I'm at Brooklands Museum in Surrey, one of Britain's first operating aerodromes and home to one of the oldest and largest aircraft factories, where I'm on a mission to find out just how this evolution was possible. I'll be exploring the pioneers that were able to break the boundaries of what was imaginable, the designs they developed and implemented, and what role this site played in the remarkable era of aviation. As well as seeing some 20th century defining aircraft along the way, I'll be given a private tour of one of the most spectacular planes to have ever graced the skies.
I could stand a £1 coin on its edge, 30-degree bank turn, and the coin wouldn't fall over.
Wow.
Before getting in the cockpit myself to see if I could cut it as a commercial pilot.
Because we've gone a little bit too fast.
Who were the brave men and women who risked their lives testing these machines, trying to break records? Will we see something like Concorde ever again? And what will be flying in the skies in the future? All will be revealed in Brooklands, first to fastest.
Humans have been obsessed with flight for a millennia. But only in the last few centuries have serious attempts been made to create a machine heavier than air, powerful enough to allow us to travel in the skies. The key breakthrough would come on Thursday, the 17th of December 1903, in the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk in North Carolina. The site had been chosen for its favourable winds and isolation away from preying reporters and journalists. Two brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright, owners of an Ohio-based workshop specialising in bicycles, printing and motors, had designed an aeroplane, the Wright Flyer as they called it, that could fly in a controlled manner by a pilot, powered by a 12-horsepower engine. It was the brothers' obsession to detail and ability to understand the best way of controlling an aeroplane in 3 dimensions that enabled them to make history. The Flyer taking off just after 10:35 a.m. and flying for roughly 12 seconds over a distance of 120 feet.
They had done it. They had achieved what man had been trying to achieve for centuries. And yet, as is the case with so many scientific breakthroughs, the inventors' minds quickly shifted from invention to protection and profit. There have been many claims that the Wright brothers made no secret of their flight. Why would they, if it was in their interest? But was it? We've come a long way since the first flight of the Wright brothers in 1903. In fact, when you really stop and think about it, it's absolutely crazy just how much progress we've made in such a short period of time. Whilst it's so much easier and more accessible to travel worldwide compared to the early 20th century, there are still some things that have needed improvement, like data roaming. Well, that's now also a thing of the past, thanks to today's video sponsor, Aerolo. Aerolo is the world's first and leading eSIM service trusted by 15 million customers. So whether you're worried about those extortionate data roaming charges, losing signal abroad, or trying to hunt down a local SIM at your airport, Aerolo solves all of that. They offer eSIMs, essentially digital SIM cards, for over 200 countries and regions. You just download the free Aerolo app, choose a data plan for your destination before you even leave, install it easily on the Wi-Fi, and activate it the moment you land. You get instant internet access, often costing less than your roaming charges would have been, and you even get to keep your original phone number active. This would have been enormously helpful when I was recently in Berlin filming a new documentary for History Hit on World War II sites. Not having access to my contacts was a real pain, so I'll definitely be using Airalo the next time I'm abroad. It really makes staying connected internationally so much simpler. Install the Airalo app free today so you can stay connected wherever you travel. Click the link in the description and use the discount code on screen now to get $3 off your first eSIM data plan.
Inform press. The brothers had written to their father in a telegram after the flight. But whilst Orville and Wilbur were keen to receive praise for their achievement, the pair quickly worked behind the scenes to patent their product. This would take time to acquire, with numerous inventors all joining the race to become the world's leading aviators. But anyone who dared challenge the Wright brothers would likely find themselves on the wrong end of a legal battle, with the pair filing 9 lawsuits against several inventors, while simultaneously defending 3 brought against them. Away from all the litigation in America, in Europe, engineers, scientists, showmen, and men with money to burn were desperately competing to achieve the accolade of being the first man to fly on the continent. One man who had deep pockets was Alberto Santos Dumont. Having made France his home, the centre of European aviation, the Brazilian-born millionaire backed a small canard biplane named the 14 Bis to win one of the prizes offered to promote the development of heavier-than-air aviation in France. In November 1906, with a large crowd watching on, his unwieldy machine would fly him 720 feet in 21.5 seconds. Caught on camera, it was the first powered flight in Europe, electrifying the continent and kick-starting an innovation race that would leave the Wright brothers' achievement but a distant memory. Hungry for even more success, Dumont continued his work, developing newer models to compete for further prizes, including the race to complete a 1-kilometre closed-circuit flight. For this, he developed a truly remarkable plane that can be seen here at Brooklands.
And here it is, the Demoiselle monoplane. Dumont built the first of these less than a year after the successful flight of his 14 Bis. They actually look remarkably similar in nature. To us today, this looks almost comically simple, but in the first decade of the 1900s, this was at the cutting edge of science and technology. You've got to remember that in this period, most people were still travelling around via horse and cart. The prospect of any machine, let alone any humans flying in the skies above them, would have just been an absolute fanciful notion. And the first of these were made out of wood, bamboo and mild steel constructions with various engines fitted. And the pilot, as you can see, would have sat just here under the wing. And these could fly a few hundred feet into the air and travel at speeds of roughly 65 miles per hour. And you can imagine what that feeling must have been like for the pilots who had perhaps never seen the world above a certain height. The whole world must have just opened up in front of them in this tiny cage suspended in the air. It must have been a truly extraordinary experience.
The experience would have no doubt been as frightening as it was exhilarating. But that alone was not going to satisfy any of the pioneers, who swiftly looked to take the next leap forward. This would be a large leap over an expansive body of water. £1,000 was the reward offered to the first person to cross the English Channel in daylight, a recognition of the significance of the milestone in the history of aviation. Two men stepped forward to the challenge, Hubert Latham and Louis Bleriot. Latham was the first to attempt the crossing on the 19th of July 1909, flying in an Antoinette monoplane powered by a 25 horsepower engine. Thousands flocked both sides of the channel to watch the attempt. Barely 7 miles out from where he took off at Saint-Gat near Calais, disaster struck. At 1,000 feet, engine failure caused the pilot to ditch out of his aeroplane into the sea, becoming the first pilot to land on a body of water. Not the record he had hoped for that day. Watching from the sidelines on crutches due to an earlier crash was Bleriot. Having spent all his money and his wife's dowry in the pursuit of aviation, Bleriot was broke. But with a last-minute windfall, he was able to mount his own challenge in a plane of his design, the Bleriot 11.
So here it is, the Bleriot 11, built exactly the same as the original. And whilst you can see some aspects of the plane, for example, its two wheels at the front, the skid at the back, the largely wooden mainframe, as well as the wooden propeller, is similar to the Demoiselle. The key difference with this plane is in its size and power. This weighs almost double that of the Demoiselle, roughly 230 kilograms unmanned. Its wingspan is roughly 28 foot, almost a third larger than Dumont's monoplane. It's longer, it's higher, and its engine, the Anzani air-cooled 3-cylinder fan-style radial piston engine, it's quite a mouthful, gives this aircraft an extra boost in horsepower. This was a far more robust plane built to travel longer distances. It actually pioneered the standard layout for single-engined monoplanes to this day. If Bleriot was to make it across the channel in one piece, this was his best bet.
If he didn't make it across, Bleriot risked losing everything. He needed favourable conditions, but time was of the essence, with Latham already gearing up to try a second time. On the 25th of July, Bleriot was woken up at 3 AM to the news that there was a break in the weather. He would fly that day. A successful takeoff from a field near Calais filled Bleriot with the confidence he needed, but mid-flight, the conditions would take a turn for the worse. As the white cliffs of Dover came into view, strong gusts blew him off course, leading him to aimlessly glide northwards for roughly 10 minutes. Just in time, 3 ships the Frenchman assumed were heading to the port of Dover provided the sense of direction he desperately needed, and soon the large French flag on the spot he had chosen to land by Dover Castle was in sight. Having taken 37 minutes to cross the channel, Bleriot landed in swirling gusts. His aircraft was damaged, but the pilot was unhurt and ready to take his place in history. The sense of euphoria continued when 4 weeks later, the star European pioneers met at the first flying competition established in Reims. High society flocked to watch flyers compete for prizes in altitude, distance, speed, and even passenger carrying. The International Aviation Cup, or the Gordon Bennett Trophy, was the star prize, with aviators challenging each other and consistently breaking records in the pursuit of fame and fortune. only a decade after the first flight at Kitty Hawk, aviator Adolphe Pégu flew his aircraft upside down for 5 seconds before performing the first ever inside loop, astounding onlookers. He also became the first pilot to successfully parachute from his plane, an action he surely could not have realised at the time was to foreshadow an imminent conflict in which aviation would come of age. By 1913, many countries were making up for lost time. None more so than Great Britain. Among the foremost designers was Elliott Verdon Roe, who would create one of the most successful aircraft of all time.
It's not the prettiest looking aircraft here at Brooklands, I will admit that, but this plane here played such a pivotal role within the history of aviation. It appears in our timeline around the period when war was very much on the horizon, and whether it was the Royal Flying Corps or the British Admiralty, the War Office was desperate to train young men up to fly, and that's what makes this machine so important. It was the plane that so many experienced their first ever flight on. And as is so often the case, war expedites innovation. And soon the Avro 500, originally designed by A.V. Roe and flown here at Brooklands for the first time in 1912, was soon replaced with the new and improved Avro 504K. And almost 9,000 of these were produced throughout the course of the First World War, training pilots, whether that was on reconnaissance flights, bombing campaigns, or as fighter pilots.
The First World War saw aircraft being used in a multitude of roles, becoming more and more deadly as time went on. Whilst the Avro served as the perfect training plane for pilots, new specialised aircraft were soon developed to take the war to the enemy. Large bombers meant that cities hundreds of miles behind the front lines could now be attacked. Britain had already had a taste of this kind of warfare when Zeppelin airships had attacked London and other cities in the first year of the war, often at night. The lack of a coordinated defence against raids like these led to the formation of the Royal Air Force, or RAF, in April 1918, the world's first independent armed air service. By the end of the war, the service had 27,000 officers, 260,000 personnel, and over 3,000 aircraft, equipping 150 squadrons. These aeroplanes were flying twice as high and fast as they could at the outbreak of the conflict. Gigantic planes were now being built to carry heavy payloads over significant distances, bombing enemy targets miles away from the land battles of the Western Front. The Vickers Vimy, many being built in the Vickers factory established here at Brooklands, could fly for over 11 hours, armed with 1,100 kilos of bombs. Bombers like these would help provide the backbone of the RAF until the 1930s, and after 1918, would help pioneer new civilian roles, transporting passengers and freights around the world.
Wow. I mean, it's big. That's really the first thing that strikes you. This must be at least a 70-foot wingspan. And to think that this comes 15 years after the first flight at Kitty Hawk. And this is a real game changer, like so many planes built here at Brooklands. not just militarily, but in terms of civilian and cargo transportation. With its 2 Rolls-Royce engines either side and its fuel capacity of 895 gallons, this could travel some seriously long distances.
In 1909, the English Channel had been regarded as the first great natural obstacle to be overcome. Now, 10 years later, it was the Atlantic Ocean that captured the public's imagination. The first transatlantic flight attempt would be undertaken by RAF pilots John Alcock and Arthur Whitton Brown on the 14th of June. It would take 16 hours and 28 minutes for the pair to fly in a Vickers Vimy from St John's in Newfoundland to Galway in Ireland, having maintained a cruising speed, often in very rough weather, of roughly 90 miles per hour.
When they landed, Alcock famously said, "We have had quite a terrible experience. It's a wonder we are here at all." There had been some nervy moments, but the Vimy had taken them through. Another milestone had been reached. Transatlantic flight is now practicable, Brown exclaimed.
The next few decades in between the wars would see the frontiers of flight pushed back as man sought to fly ever higher, faster and further. Aircraft were now specifically built to establish new records, one of these being the Spirit of St. Louis, in which Charles Lindbergh flew from New York to Paris, successfully undertaking the first solo non-stop transatlantic flight in history in 1927, and winning a $25,000 prize for his efforts. The journey took 33 hours and 30 minutes, a lot longer than the 7.5-hour trip today. In 1932, Amelia Earhart became the first woman ever to fly non-stop across the Atlantic Ocean from Canada to Ireland. A few years later, after travelling solo around the United States, Earhart would then become the first aviator ever to fly solo from Hawaii to the US mainland, a particularly dangerous route, travelling 2,400 miles in 18 hours. By the time hostilities were beginning to re-emerge in Europe towards the end of the 1930s, commercial airlines had been established, with planes such as the Handley Page HB-42 or German Junker Ju-52, carrying civilian passengers to all corners of the world. The outbreak of war nevertheless resumed innovation within the military aircraft sector, compressing what might have been decades of progress into a few years. Immense yet streamlined aircraft such as the Wellington bomber and Boeing B-29 Superfortress exemplified the quick advancements in bomber plane capabilities, while swift and agile Spitfires and P-51 Mustangs highlighted the rapid evolution in fighter aircraft. But without doubt, the most impressive aeroplane developed throughout the conflict was designed by Messerschmitt, one of the primary aircraft manufacturers of Hitler's war machine. Utilising an entirely new form of propulsion in the jet engine, patented simultaneously by British engineer Frank Whittle and German physicist Hans von Ohain in the early 1930s, the Me-262 became the first operational jet aircraft to participate in the Second World War. Able to travel speeds of over 850 kilometers per hour, the Me-262 was significantly faster than any other aircraft the Allies flew in the skies. It was also the first plane designed with swept wings, a flying tail and slats on the leading edge. The Me-262 may not have turned the tide of the war in the end, but it provided the blueprint for jet fighters in decades to come. The next 20 years saw tremendous advancements in the new era of jet engine flight. The speed of sound was broken in 1947, the first jet aircraft began operation in 1952, and a decade later, an American X-15 rocket plane became the first aircraft to reach the stratosphere. But one aircraft would truly redefine the limits of what was thought possible.
It would be an understatement to say that this aircraft behind me was revolutionary. Off the bat, for a military jet produced in the 1960s, it still looks like it could be in modern air fleets today. And up until about 20 years ago, it was. But what I've come to see are these things here, the rotating jet engine nozzles that direct the thrust downwards, pushing this 12 to 25,000 pounds jet into the air vertically. Now, I don't know about you, but every time I see one of these take off vertically, I feel like I'm in some sort of science fiction film. And again, to think that this comes just 65 years after the first ever flight. But it's not the only thing that makes this so spectacular, because in May 1969, it was to set a new record in the Daily Mail Transatlantic Air Race.
The event commemorating the 50th anniversary of Alcock and Brown's first crossing of the Atlantic offered a cash prize for the quickest flight from London to New York. It was in a RAF Hawker Harrier that squadron leader Tom Leckey-Thompson took off vertically from a coal yard by St Pancras Station in London, flew across the pond and landed on a pier on the Hudson River in New York within the space of 6 hours, 11 minutes and 57 seconds, a new record time. As impressive as Leckey-Thompson's record was, behind the scenes, work had already begun on the development of an aircraft that, in theory, would be able to fly the same route in half the time. What's more, this plane could take passengers.
Speed. Speed is what airlines exist to sell, and speed is what Concorde offers the
Introducing Concorde, a supersonic technological masterpiece that could fly on the edge of space at twice the speed of sound. On the 2nd of March 1969, it made its maiden flight, and before long was carrying passengers around the world. Brooklands was central to the Concorde project. It was the site of the initial meeting between the British and French aircraft industry that saw its launch, and once manufacturing began, almost a third of every aircraft was made here before being transported to Filton or Toulouse for final assembly.
Wow. Here it is. The Delta Golf right in front of us here. This is the first ever British produced Concorde. And put aside the stats, put aside the fact that this can fly at supersonic speeds up to 1,400 miles per hour. Just look at the thing. It's just so aesthetically pleasing, isn't it? And as you can see here, you've got the iconic nose and visor, retractable of course, depending on whether you're taking off, you're mid-flight, or you're landing. And as you move towards the front of the plane, you can see all the way down it the Delta Wing. These were designed specifically to provide sufficient lift when travelling at supersonic speeds, and they reduce drag tremendously with their extremely aerodynamic shape. And how could you forget the Rolls-Royce Olympus engines, capable of providing a static thrust of 40,000 pounds. Without these, you have no supersonic flight. Without these, you have no Concorde.
This Concorde, built in 1974, would be the first aircraft to carry 100 passengers at Mach 2. The term used often by pilots to mean twice the speed of sound. One man very familiar with all of this lingo is Mike Bannister, former chief pilot of the British Airways Concorde Fleet between 1995 and 2003. Today, he was giving me an exclusive tour of the Delta Golf.
Come aboard.
Yes.
Welcome aboard the Brooklands Concorde.
Hi, lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you.
Let's hop aboard.
Okay, after you.
Wow. This is my first experience aboard a Concorde. I've heard many a tale.
All complimentary, I trust.
Yes,
Take a
absolutely. Right, so we are sat in the seats. I notice, of course, that there are only two per aisle. One thing is, with Concorde, it's quite a narrow plane. For budget airlines, that might be an issue, but for Concorde, I'm assuming less so. How much would one of these set you back a ticket on aboard Concorde?
Well, when we stopped flying, it was about £10,000 round trip to New York, which is about £20,000 in today's money.
Woo!
And of course, don't forget that when she came into service in 1976, this was the standard. There weren't big wide-bodied aeroplanes, there were narrow-bodied aeroplanes, 707 and the VC-10. And so this sort of fuselage side was not unusual. The biggest difference between Concorde and conventional airplanes at that time was how much legroom you've got. And you're fairly tall, Luke.
Yes.
And there's bags of legroom there, 37 inches.
Way more than your average budget airline.
Absolutely. And of course, you're not in here for long.
No.
So for 3 hours and 20 minutes to get across the Atlantic, not long enough for videos. There were no videos on board. We had a great stereo system, greatest cabin service in the world, lovely food, lovely wine. And before you knew it, you were there. But you were there in New York an hour and 40 minutes before you left London.
And you mentioned the price when this was first launched, £20,000. It's not affordable to everyone. To what extent was the Concorde a very exclusive experience for your sort of high flyers?
Well, it was designed as a business person's airplane. 80% of our customers were business people, and of those, 80% were repeat customers. And they're the chief exec, chief operating officers, chief financial officers of big companies where time really is money. And those folks could do in 2 days in New York what would otherwise take 4 days. And so the overall cost of traveling on Concorde compared to a subsonic airplane was actually less because you've got less time away from the office. And then for a market that was not initially thought of, which was the leisure market, we started operating special flights. And for those, from doing a quick flight, take off from Heathrow, fly around, go supersonic up to Mach 2, back to Heathrow within an hour and 40 minutes, all the way through to 23-day round-the-world air cruise, where you'd stay in 5- and 6-star hotels, stay with the same crew all the way around. And that was a really big, bustling business and leisure market that kept Concorde going for all those years, for 27 years of successful operation.
Well, I can imagine you must have flown some high-flying customers. Any celebrities?
A celebrity or two, but of course in British Airways discretion was our byword.
Oh, okay,
But
understood.
a couple of my favourite ones, because I'm interested in ballet, with Rudolf Nureyev. I like golf, so Tom Watson.
great.
And the interesting thing was the regular customers got to know the crew, often on first name terms. So they were talking to people they'd met before. There was a real club atmosphere on board the aircraft, and indeed some very, very big multi-billion pound and multi-billion dollar deals were actually done on board the aircraft out of the prying eyes of, excuse me, the media.
It was not just the exclusivity and privacy afforded to passengers that kept flyers coming back for more. Airlines such as British Airways prided themselves on their in-flight services and entertainment.
obviously back in the 70s, there weren't films on the go. What was the in-flight entertainment like?
Well, the in-flight entertainment was the pleasure of travelling twice the speed of sound.
Well, okay, yeah.
Looking out of the window and
yeah.
seeing airplanes travelling backwards, even though they're actually going the same way as you are, because you're going twice as fast as them. The in-flight audio system was fantastic. We as crew would keep our customers apprised of what was going on, so we'd talk them through the acceleration.
Oh, interesting.
We'd talk to them being about at Mach 2. The other thing was, prior to 9/11, we could also invite passengers up onto the flight deck during the flight.
Wow.
And even our really most regular customers would want to do that. And on a scheduled flight where you might have 100 people on board, you'd always find 15, 20 people who wanted to come up, even if they'd done it before. And on our special flights, all 100 wanted to come up. So we'd get all 100 onto the flight deck. We'd put an extra crew member on for that.
And Mike, let me ask you, a few people have said when they flew aboard Concorde that they didn't experience as much turbulence. Is that true?
Absolutely, because you're up above all of the weather. So yes, you've got to climb through the weather area and descend through the weather area to come in and land. The sort of areas where conventional airplanes fly up to 35,000 feet. Once you get above that, you're above the weather. It is really smooth. I could stand a £1 coin on its edge on the flight deck at twice the speed of sound, 1,350 miles an hour, in a 30-degree bank turn, and the coin wouldn't fall over.
Are you serious?
Absolutely serious.
Wow. Okay. And I guess the only other thing is supersonic flight. What would happen when you broke the sound barrier? Was there a big boom? What happened?
That's the amazing
Did anything
thing.
happen?
Absolutely amazing thing. The designers were so clever. There is no sensation of going through the sound barrier.
Right. Okay.
The only sensation you get is just before we get to that, when we put the afterburners, the reheats on again. You feel two slight nudges of acceleration in your back. Going through the sound barrier itself, nothing. Which is why we have indicators at the front of the cabin to show what speed you're doing. Once you get past Mach 1, it's smooth as silk.
Well, speaking about the front of the cabin, should we make our way towards the flight deck?
After you. Welcome to the flight deck of Concorde. Take a seat.
I've never seen so many buttons in my life.
On this, the engineers panel, there are 365 knobs, switches, buttons and captions. We used to jokingly say one for every day of the year.
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary.
This is my office. This is literally has the best view in the world. And I'd sit here, the captain, the co-pilot would sit there.
And in terms of the actual flight deck itself, how does this differ from, let's say, your Airbuses and your Boeings back in the day and also to this day?
I think the biggest difference is that the quantity of information that's presented to the crew. Of course, this is all analog, it's all instrumentation. It's like 4 airplanes in one, a fast one, a slow one, a high one, a low one. We're travelling supersonically, so we need many more systems. So for the crew need to manage all those systems, information has to be here. And because it's analog, they are physically here all the time. On the modern airplane, you've got TV screens, you can show the crew what they need to know when they need to know it. But with fixed instruments, analog instruments, all this stuff has to be there all the time. So it looks kind of crowded.
And be honest, do you know what every single one of these buttons and switches does?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Oh.
That's why the conversion course to learn to fly it is 6 months long.
True, that's true, that's true. Well, although you can't fly Concorde today, no one can, you can get the next best thing to it here at Brooklands.
We can go and fly the simulator if you'd like to right now, and it is just like flying the real thing.
I can't wait. Let's do that, Mike.
Let's go.
An exclusive experience here at Brooklands. I was about to enter the only operational Concorde simulator in the world.
Well, Mike, here we are inside the official BA Concorde simulator. Let me ask you, does it take you back every time you sit in the seat, back to your flying days?
It does indeed. It's just like being home again.
Of course, we need to mention that this is the very simulator that BA pilots were all trained on to fly Concorde. This is the one.
Yeah, this is the very machine that I and all my colleagues trained on.
Wow.
We learned to fly Concorde in a 6-month course. And so 4 months of that was ground school in the classroom and flying the simulator, 2 months flying the airplane. So I, and also subsequently I became an instructor, spent many, many happy hours sitting in this very machine. The two pilots are equally qualified, it's just the captain's the more experienced.
Right, of course, okay.
The fact that I had a grand total of 0 experience flying any sort of aircraft meant that a very thorough pre-flight check was needed. Once complete, it was time to put the headsets on and take off.
Brakes released, 3, 2, 1, now. You slam the throttles open because it's just telling a computer what to do. Starting to move already. Next thing I'm going to say is airspeed building. Here we are, airspeed's building. 100 knots, the power's checked, the green lights are on. The next call's V1. The last time at which we can stop the takeoff if we have a problem, V1. The next call is rotate, when I'm going to pull back on the control column to pitch us up. Rotate.
Wow.
Up we go, positive climb, gear up.
Okay.
I'm going to switch the reheats off. I'm going to throttle the engines. And I'm going to put the automatic throttles in. And I'm going to turn left. So here we go, 20, 25, 30 degrees embankment. Turning out over Staines. There's the M25, a bit quieter than normal.
Yes, avoiding the traffic.
Avoiding the traffic. Now, it's a very, very, very flexible aeroplane. It's rather like a fighter or a fighter jet. And in fact, my RAF colleagues would always say to me, it's just like a fast jet in the RAF, but with 100 people attached to it.
Right, okay. And I've noticed, you know, you get up into the air very quickly. How long does it take you to reach cruising altitude in this?
Depends on the weight of the airplane, the outside temperature, but out of Miami once with 73 passengers on board, I got up to Mach 2 in just 17 minutes from brake release. So from the moment I let the brakes go to being at twice the speed of sound was a mere 17 minutes.
And that's pretty damn fast.
It is indeed, yeah. You can spend longer than that standing still on that
Yes,
M25.
absolutely, absolutely. I've been there.
So talking of speed, what the next thing we're going to do is start speeding the airplane up. Now, Concorde has a movable nose and visor. That enables us to streamline the airplane to go quickly. And so we're going to do that now. What I'm going to do is fly level, put the power back on, we'll start to accelerate from 250 knots, and I'm going to ask you, if you would, to bring up the nose and visor. So,
Right.
nose and visor up, please.
Okay, so you push that towards you,
Yeah,
get
and
it
lift
out.
and that's it. Up comes that. Selects up the nose, and as you can actually see, it'll start to move in a moment.
Oh yeah.
And then, when that's up, visor up, please.
Okay, and again, lift that up. Oh yeah, you can see it coming over the screen. And you would have done this every single time?
Every time we go quickly, we do this. If you're going to be at 250 knots or above, then that's what we're going to do. That noise is because we've gone a little bit too fast, but because we're always trying to fly at the maximum speed we can, it was allowable to have occasional little overspeed warnings like that.
And Mike, one of the first things that people think about when you're discussing Concorde is supersonic flight. Did you always fly at supersonic speeds?
Yeah, when we're on scheduled flights, yes, we always did, because we were flying scheduled services to New York, Washington, Bahrain, Singapore, and down to Miami. But what we're doing then is to try and get our regular customers, the business people, most expeditiously to where they want to be. So we would always fly supersonically. Twice the speed of sound, 1,350 miles an hour through the air, sometimes as much as 1,480 miles an hour over the ground.
Wow. And what was the fastest you ever flew with one of these?
Oh, I guess about 1,480 knots, which is nautical miles an hour. I did the second fastest flight ever between New York and London, a mere 2 hours and 54 minutes and 35 seconds.
Wow. How long does it take on a usual nowadays?
Going from London to New York, about 8.5.
Wow. I mean, that really just puts it into perspective, doesn't it?
It does.
It's incredible.
Before you knew it, after a few short hours above the clouds, you'd be preparing for descent. Nervous flyers will tell you that this is the part of any flight that induces the most anxiety. As I retracted the visor and put the landing gear down, I began to wonder if a plane like Concorde presented any unique challenges when it came to approaching the runway for landing.
And is this the part of the flight, Mike, you'd say, where you have to be at your most focused?
Yeah, this is the bit where I'm thinking mostly about the actual landing. We're going to land on 27 left. Now, I know where it is, I can see it, so I'm looking out of the window, but we've also got radio aids that will enable us to find the airfield and to fly the correct descent and approach path. So what we're doing now is something we could do back in the day and land on a cross runway, which is 2-3 towards the southwest of the airfield, which is coming up right now. So here we go. 20, 15, close the throttles, down she comes, and as soon as we're down, I'll put the engines into reverse, keep the airplane nice and straight on the runway, and there we are. It's as straightforward as that.
I'll give you a round of applause.
Well, I couldn't have asked for a smoother touchdown. It was almost as if Mike had done this before. But just over 20 years ago, Mike would be landing in a real plane for the final time after the decision was made to discontinue the aircraft. The news would come as a shock to many and received fierce opposition from those who held Concorde close to their hearts, including Mike.
And Mike, when did you first receive the news that this beautiful plane was being discontinued?
Well, I knew about it before it was announced publicly, and I was involved in the discussions inside BA as to what we were to do with the airplane. And as you might imagine, I argued vehemently that we shouldn't. There was a lot of people within British Airways that loved Concorde, and there were other people that thought she was a drain on British Airways' financial success. In fact, Concorde was profitable for British Airways all the way through her entire career with the airplane, apart from a couple of times. So she made a lot of money for the company. But all the costs were mounting. There were some very large costs around the corner. Air France had made it clear that they wanted to stop flying. And so we were faced with a decision that was very difficult. And as Rod Eddington, the chief exec at the time, said, we always knew that the story of Concorde would have a last chapter. We just didn't think it would come this soon. And in hindsight, it was probably the right decision because those costs did come along. But of course, no other aircraft yet has done what Concorde was able to do.
No. And why do you think this remains one of the most iconic aircraft in history?
Well, the scientists and the psychiatrists have got a view on that, which I think is probably absolutely correct. It is a beautiful airplane to look at.
Yeah.
So it appeals to one side of the brain because it is so beautiful, but the other side of the brain is appealed to as well because everybody knows about the technical achievements of this wonderful aircraft. That you could fly faster than the Earth rotates, you'd travel on the edge of space where the sky got darker, where you could see the curvature of the Earth. 23 miles a minute, a mile every 2 3/4 seconds. You could literally arrive in New York an hour and 40 minutes before you left London. If you know that stuff and you see it's beautiful, that's why she appeals.
Yeah. It's the best of both worlds, isn't it?
As the chief pilot of the BA Concorde Fleet, it fell to Mike to make the statement to the public, despite his reservations against retiring the airplane.
I'll leave you and go and start taking the controls of Concorde for this, the final flight from New York to London.
After 27 years of chartered Concorde flights, the age of supersonic travel for the everyday passenger was over.
And flew Concorde, a Wright to be celebrating tonight.
And do you think they'll ever make anything like this ever again?
Oh, I'm a great believer. I'm an optimist. I think that the future of supersonic travel will come back. And I think that people want that as a race, as a human race. We've always wanted to go faster. Ever since we domesticated a horse 6,500 years ago, we've always wanted to go faster. So those times will come back.
Today, we still travel fast, but only really in military jets and spacecraft. Commercial air travel, nonetheless, has continued to boom in the last couple of decades since Concorde graced our skies. This has meant more exciting possibilities for globetrotters, as well as further challenges for those in the industry. Environmental concerns have impacted aircraft designs, as well as the need for greater but more efficient performance. Managing increasingly crowded skies has also become a serious issue for air traffic controllers, whilst many airports are at max capacity. There are many challenges that lay ahead, but if we have learnt anything from the progress we have made over the last century and a quarter, it is that there can be little doubt of our capabilities to adapt, create and innovate, to build bigger, faster and more efficient.
Well, it's certainly been a journey, but I can't think of any place I'd rather explore the history of aviation than here at Brooklands, the site where so much innovation took place. It's been so easy along the way to get lost in the stats, speed, wingspan, engine power, and all that good stuff. But I've really tried to put things into perspective. When he was younger, my father used to speak to my great-granddad about the First World War. My great-grandfather was born in 1890. That means even when he was a teenager, no aircraft existed. By his early 20s, he was very unlikely to have ever seen a plane in the skies above him. He died in 1974 at 84 years old enough to have seen a plane take off vertically and this thing fly at supersonic speeds across the Atlantic. It's when you put it into those terms that you realise just how far we've come, and it makes you wonder, what will I see when I look into the skies at 84 years old? As they say, the sky's the limit.
Thank you to Brooklands Museum for making this video possible. As the home of British motorsport and aviation, the museum hosts many events and activities throughout the year to celebrate the site's incredible history of innovation and endeavour. Find them at brooklandsmuseum.com for more information, and stay tuned for an upcoming episode at the site where we trade jet engines for horsepower.